Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Goveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, keep goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
Take that person that you've known for years, who's a colleague of yours or even your spouse or whomever, and tomorrow you're going to spend a half hour not just listening, but you have a task, which is I'm going to try and glean some nugget of information based on their nonverbals, based on what they say, that I never noticed before. I'm going to notice something that I never seen before, and you're going to really, really focus on them deeply. Not in an obtrusive way where it's obvious that you're like spying on them. You have to be relaxed in this. But you'll be surprised at how much you miss by the fact that you're tending to your smartphone or you're thinking about what you're going to say or about what other people have told you during the day. You're not paying attention. And I want you to be motivated, and I want you to try each time you interact with a person to glean something that you had never realized before about them.
welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 304. Today's guest needs absolutely no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Robert Greene is the author of the New York Times bestsellers, The 48 Laws of Power, The Art of Seduction, The 33 Strategies of War, The 50th Law, and Mastery. His highly anticipated new book, The Laws of Human Nature, explores people's drives and motivations, even when they are unconscious of them themselves. Knowing why people do what they do is the most important tool we can possess, without which our other talents can only take us so far. Having read hundreds of business books myself, perhaps the books that have had the most profound positive impact on how I show up each day and how I conduct myself are books on psychology, behavioral economics, neuroscience, and biological evolution. Books that ultimately help me to understand myself and understand others. As such, I was really excited to read The Laws of Human Nature and speak with Greene about what is such a fundamental topic. In addition to having a strong following within the business world and a deep following in Washington, D.C., Greene's books are hailed by everyone, from war historians to the biggest musicians in the industry. In fact, he worked with 50 Cent on the 50th Law. You can expect to learn a ton from this conversation, but in particular, 3 key takeaways are: 1. How having an estimated 80 jobs before becoming an author shaped Greene's worldview and made him a better and more creative writer. 2. Why it is our moments of frustration where we often seek out life-changing answers. And 3. How Greene seeks the path of what is most right by looking at questions from multiple angles and contemplating many alternatives. This just scratches the surface of the many enlightening things we discussed. Just peek at the topics discussed in the show notes to get a feel for everything we went through. So with that, it gives me much pleasure to present you with one of the most preeminent authors of our time, the one and only Robert Greene. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Well, thank you for having me, Steve.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, joining me all the way from sunny Los Angeles, California.
Yeah, the sun is shining as it does every day here. It's a little boring, but yeah.
Yeah, I imagine it gets boring when it's the same thing day in, day out. It usually tends to be the unexpected that delights us.
Exactly. I would love some nice Melbourne rain right now.
Yeah, well, it's actually raining outside right now, even though we're in the middle of summer, but it is what it is.
Oh.
Look, Robert, I mean, our audience will be very, very familiar with you and your work, and I'm sure they're just as excited as I am to having a conversation with you today. But, you've got a new book out called The Laws of Human Nature, which we will get to later in this conversation. But before that, I mean, I'd love to really get to know you better as a person. And I know that before you became a writer, I mean, you have estimated having about 80 different jobs, construction worker,
Right.
translator, magazine editor. I mean, how do you think your worldview, your creativity, and your writing has benefited from having such a large, disparate set of experiences before you became a writer?
Well, I think it's kind of the standard education and apprenticeship for a writer. You want to know as many different people as possible. And, I also lived a lot in Europe in many different foreign countries. I worked in a hotel in Paris. I had a job in London. I was a teacher in Barcelona. So I had a very broad experience about people. And my first book, The 48 Laws of Power, I brought a lot of that experience to the book because I witnessed people in positions of power in practically every kind of field you can imagine, and in all countries, et cetera. So I had seen a lot. I had a breadth of experience that kind of really, I think, really enriched my experience and gave me a lot of things to draw upon when I write.
Yeah, and I think if you look at what innovation and creativity essentially is, it's associational thinking and being able to connect the dots between a lot of supposedly remotely connected subjects.
Yeah, I had one job, probably the weirdest job I had was as a skip tracer. That means I worked in a detective agency, and the job was to try and track down people who had gone missing, who owed a lot of money, and the police were after them. It was a really, really bad job, really grimy. You really felt bad at the end of the day. But man, did it teach me a lot about how easy it is to deceive people, because the job was all about deception on the telephone. So, when I wrote in 48 Laws, a lot of it had to do with con artists and deception. I could draw upon that really strange job that I had. So my motto in life is everything is material. So if you meet me in a cafe and we have a conversation, you better be sure that someday I'm going to probably use something that you said in one of my books.
Fantastic. I think that's something that a lot of people listening to this show, such as entrepreneurs, need to be cognizant of, because if they want to come up with breakthrough ideas or solve problems on a day-to-day basis in their business, having a more disparate set of experiences generally makes them more creative and more able to solve those problems.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I learned, how to think in different ways. Being a journalist or working in Hollywood or doing all the different things I had, all the research. So, yeah, I think having experience in different fields and then combining them all together, which is sort of the subject of my fifth book, Mastery, is kind of sort of the path that I took.
Yeah, and on having grimy jobs and working in construction, I had the rock journalist and rock music author Mick Wall on the show recently, and he said that before he became an author, he did all kinds of dirty jobs, scrubbing the big pots at Heathrow Airport that we used to make, the airplane food and all that sort of stuff, and he credits that for developing his sort of resilience, and he says it's the grit that makes the pearl. Would you say the same thing about some of the grimier jobs that you had?
Yeah, definitely. I had to learn patience. I had to learn a lot of what you do in life is learning what you don't like, what you hate, and what you don't want to follow. I preach that a lot to people. So I learned early on that there was a lot of, I'm not really good in a company atmosphere working with a lot of people. I don't like all the politics and the bullshit. So I realized through all this experience that I'm basically have an entrepreneurial mindset. I need to be working for myself. And the other thing that having all these kind of grimy jobs does is it helps you build sort of empathy for common people. When I write a book, I'm always sort of trying to address as large an audience as possible. And I have a lot of sympathy, a lot of empathy for people in bad jobs who want to get out, who want to branch out, who have a dream or want to create something. So I'm always sort of thinking of that person when I'm writing a book, and I want my books to help them.
And that's something you talk about in your new book, The Laws of Human Nature, around people who may have a false purpose. And that purpose could be around, making money, being important, obtaining some sense of social status. But oftentimes they give up a big part of themselves in pursuit of this false purpose, because they ultimately wind up, say, in a crappy job where they don't like playing politics, they absolutely hate it, and they're just living for the weekend, but they keep pursuing that goal because that's what society has led them to believe they should be doing.
Yeah, that's a major dead end that people fall into, and it's understandable because, it's a harsh competitive world out there, and you can't just, the cliche is follow your passion. You can't, that's not practical.
Yeah.
You have to make money in this life. You have to feed yourself and your family. So when I talk about finding a purpose, which is one of the chapters in the laws of human nature, I don't mean just leaving your job and picking up a guitar and writing rock songs and trying to get by like that. I want you to think of what you were meant to accomplish in life, where your brain is naturally, the direction it naturally heads towards, the things that excites it, what you really, really love to learn. And finding somehow, no matter where you are in life, in your 20s or 30s, finding somehow some way to get back on a path that leads you more in the direction of what you really love and what excites you. Because, you can't learn very quickly in life unless you're excited by the subject. We all had that experience when we were younger, when we were forced to learn math or something we hated. We didn't retain anything. So you're setting yourself an impossible goal if you're trying to become a lawyer and you don't really like law and you find it boring. It's going to take you a long time to sort of master the subject. So it's actually a very practical bit of advice to somehow get yourself on a career path that meshes with what you love, with what you were destined to accomplish, what makes you different and unique. And in that chapter, I have some very practical hints about how you can do that.
Yes, and you definitely do. And I think just on that, just to share a quick personal anecdote on that, I spent almost a decade in the corporate world where I basically helped listed companies comply with their SEC regulations. And, the money was great, but deep down, I like to say that I was miserably comfortable. And it wasn't until I actually started to become more self-aware about my strengths, where I derive a sense of greater fulfillment from, that I started to explore entrepreneurship and now derive way more fulfillment from, say, creating content, hosting podcasts, working with entrepreneurs to get their businesses off the ground. But I guess it required a bit of courage to really break away from what society expects, from what your family expects, from, you're operating in this environment where you ultimately become institutionalized in many ways, and you look around at your manager, at your peers, and they're all doing the same thing. So it's easy to just conflate that with, well, I guess this is what I should be doing. So, how does one find that sort of sense of emotional self-awareness, if you will, to really start challenging the status quo and gear away from the narrative that they've been fed for, say, 20 or 30 years?
Well, it really comes down to how badly do you want it. Your desire, your level of commitment, your persistence are all going to play a key role. And so, sometimes it takes a path like what you had, where you have to become very frustrated and you have to learn what you don't like. And then you reach a certain age, maybe you was probably in your early 30s or so, you say, this isn't not where I want to be. I know 5 or 6 years ago, I was probably wanted to go in this direction and I lost my way. And that level of frustration makes you highly motivated. I know I was headed in the wrong direction, working in Hollywood, trying to write screenplays, working for directors, and I hated it. And I felt kind of soulless, and I realized this isn't where I should be heading. And by the time I reached the age of 36, I was kind of desperate. So when I was given a chance to change course and write a book, I was so motivated. I was so hungry. I was so desperate. And sometimes you got to feel a little bit of desperation, a sense of urgency that you have to find what you were meant to do or you're going to die. You're going to die trying, as 50 Cent would say.
Yes.
And, sometimes it doesn't come in your 20s because you're having a good time. You're with your friends. Everything's great. You feel really healthy and all. But, spend 10 years at a grind on a job that you hate, and that frustration and desperation will really, really motivate you. And the path that I'm telling you to come back to is to discover who you are, to think about what it is that you really love, what it is that excites you, what it is that makes you different. If you look at anybody successful in business or in culture, you have to say to yourself, there's nobody else like them. There was nobody else like Steve Jobs, and there probably never, ever will be. Mm-hmm. There's nobody like a Warren Buffett. These people are one of a kind. They're strange. They're not afraid of being strange. You have to take what makes you unique and not be afraid of it. You have to build a business or whatever it is, sort of revolving around what makes you different from other people, not what makes you similar.
Yeah. And I love what you said there about needing to be really, really frustrated before you start looking for answers. And I think it was in Plato's The Republic, where he says something along the lines of no philosophy before 30, because a lot of people haven't gone through enough to really seek out the answers. And it's like that old adage, when a student is ready, a teacher appears.
Yeah. I want people to look at this, look at your 20s as an apprenticeship. Don't be in such a hurry to make your first $1 million or $1 billion or whatever it is when you're in your 20s. What you want to do is you want to kind of have some adventure. You want to try your hand at different experiences. You want to accumulate skills. That's the future that we live in. It's a skill-based economy. Mm-hmm. You want to develop at least 2 or 3 incredibly strong skills in different fields. So by the time you're in your 30s, your brain, everything has been set so that you can start becoming really creative and make connections and associations between all the different types of skills that you've acquired. So I say your prime creative years are in your early 30s, and those are the ones you really don't want to waste. Yeah. So you want to have a degree of focus, but you want to experiment and have some fun. And then by the time you reach your early 30s, when your brain is at its maximum, its most creative, you're ready and you're motivated and you've got all of the skills to make something incredible.
Definitely. And I mean, on purpose, you have been at the writing game now, well, at least writing books for about 23 years since the 48 Laws of Power came out back in 1995. And I mean, how do you define your own purpose, Robert?
Well, when I say that people that you find what makes you unique, I don't mean this to brag, but mm-hmm. I think you could say that you could hate the book, The 48 Laws of Power, my other books, but you can't say that you've ever seen a book that looks like it or that has the same feel. It's one of a kind. It's a very, very strange book. And so my path was, I tried different kinds of writing. It didn't satisfy me. I had a lot of experiences about power in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Felt a lot of people there were kind of hypocritical about the kind of games that they'd be willing to play. And so when it came a chance to write a book, I wanted to bring all of my personal experience and all of my vast reading of history to create something that had never been created before, and a kind of self-help book that deals with the grimy, manipulative side of power mm-hmm. and teaches you what people are really up to in a way that's fun. So a lot of self-help books aren't really fun, and I decided I want to have a lot of stories. I want to create stories, historical examples. I'm going to seduce you, the reader, into enjoying this book. And while you're enjoying it, you're going to learn a lot. So that was sort of my path in creating that book.
So, and that's one thing I wanted to touch on, because I know you've said that when you got into writing, you felt that other self-help books were gooey, Pollyanna-ish, and nauseating. Yeah. And I guess the question I have is on the laws of human nature, because just take a step back, for me as an entrepreneur, I mean, there's a lot of business books out there, but the most transformative books in my life have been books on behavior, books on philosophy, stuff that gets to the root of mindset and understanding yourself, understanding other people, and therefore updating the operating system with which you navigate the world. You get that foundation right, and then you can worry about the methodologies and sales tactics and everything else. What are you hoping people to get out of the laws of human nature that they wouldn't be able to get from, say, other books on human behavior?
Well, there are a lot of excellent books about there on human behavior, and I used a lot of them for my research. But I approach it from a slightly different angle. Mm-hmm. I'm not an academic. I'm not sitting here, trying to instruct you in all of the archaeology and anthropology about how we evolve as a species, or go into the neuroscience, although it's grounded in the book. I did a lot of research on that. I'm here to give you an extremely practical guide to human behavior, but I want to make it as deep and profound as possible, not superficial. And so, one of the premises that I have in the book, and you may or may not buy, is that there are a lot of difficult people out there. There are toxic people. I'm not saying everyone, maybe 1 in 5, 1 in 10. You're going to encounter them in life. They're going to be your boss. They're going to be your business partner. They're going to be a colleague, and they're going to make your life miserable. And so I wanted to look at sort of this side of human nature, of what makes, because we're a social animal and we can't survive without being good at understanding the people we deal with, having social intelligence. And I want to help people out there who may be a little bit naive about people, who don't judge properly. You make one bad decision about hiring a partner or a CEO or a board of directors member, and you're going to pay for it for years to come. They can ruin your life. So I want to give you an instruction manual about what motivates human behavior from as deep down as possible. So when you encounter people in a meeting or in your office, you're not so surprised. You're not so confused by why people are doing this kind of difficult behavior. I'm giving you kind of a roadmap for deciphering strange, toxic, difficult, surprising behavior, whether it's your spouse, your children, your boss, or whomever.
And that's something that comes out in the book when you talk about the mask and the shadow, and how people tend to walk around with their masks on. But sometimes you might see the shadow emerge, and that sometimes reveals their true self. And that could be, like you said, you're looking for a business partner, or it could be that you're pursuing someone to be, say, your significant other. And what they will project at least during the first few months of that interaction, may just be their mask. And it may be many, many months or maybe even years later before that shadow really emerges. But what you've put forward in the book are different nonverbal cues, such as facial expressions, body posture, nervous gestures, and so on, that people can use to help better determine someone's character. Yes.
I want you to be kind of a Sherlock Holmes when it comes to looking at people. And there's two ways I say that, that kind of detective work is sort of fun. So this task of deciphering what people are up to should be fun. But I want you to become very, very observant to the details that people give out about who they are, about their character. And sometimes when somebody acts in a way that seems quote unquote out of character, they're angry or they do something aggressive or naughty, they'll come back to you and they'll say, oh, something came over me. That wasn't me, the classic line. And I want you to tell yourself, no, that is them. That is when the mask falls off. When people suddenly give into an emotion, that's what they've been trying to repress in front of you for a while, and their real self is coming out. I want you to look at how people treat their employees, their children, their spouse, to be able to see how to judge them. When you're in front of them in the office or wherever, they're smiling and they're being pleasant and they're trying to show how progressive they are. But when the doors close, they're yelling at their secretary. They're being mean and insensitive to their wife, etc. I want you to look for these kinds of details. I want you to look how people act under pressure and stress. That is when they reveal a lot of truths about who they are. It's easy to say that I'm great, I'm strong, I can handle anything. But you put me in an emergency, a crisis in a business or wherever, and a lot of who I really am will suddenly come to the fore. I want you to pay attention to that. When people are suddenly given power, a lot of their real character and some of their ugliness suddenly comes out. How do they handle power, adversity, stress? How do they handle other people? When does this shadow side of theirs sneak out? People are constantly emitting signs as to what's happening beneath the mask, but you are not paying attention.
So power definitely reveals and rather than corrupts, like many people say. But when it comes to paying attention to those nonverbal cues, and I know this is something I've had difficulty myself with when I've read books on behavior, trying to actually put into practice what I read in the moment without seeming a little bit robotic or coming across a little bit awkward or weird can be challenging. But I know you said there, one thing I wanted to touch on was that you've got to make it fun, playing the detective. Like, it can be a fun thing. And don't expect to be a pro at it just from picking up the book and you're ready to go. It's something that you need to work on and train like a muscle.
Yeah, it's an exercise. You're an athlete, you're learning a new skill in observing people. And yes, it has to be fun. And the reason why I say it has to be fun is a lot of books on nonverbal communication say you have to listen better, yada, yada, yada. And that's kind of, okay, that's very nice, but it's very simple.
Yeah.
It's not that you have to listen better. It's that you have to be excited and motivated and want to understand people on a different level. So, all of us are voyeurs. We go to the cinema and we watch a movie because we want to get inside some weird person's life, the serial killer or the mob boss. We're fascinated by other people. Well, the people around you, no matter how boring they may seem to you on the surface, they're actually much more interesting than you imagine. They are truly weird. If you could see their dreams, you would realize how truly strange they are. So I want you to be excited about trying to pierce the mask and understand the people you deal with. And you're right, it's like a training manual. You are exercising. You are Michael Jordan training yourself. And I give you all kinds of exercises. So just one simple one is take that person that you've known for years, who's a colleague of yours or even your spouse or whomever, and tomorrow you're going to spend a half hour not just listening, but you have a task, which is I'm going to try and glean some nugget of information based on their nonverbals, based on what they say, that I never noticed before. I'm going to notice something that I never seen before. And you're going to really, really focus on them deeply, not in an obtrusive way where it's obvious that you're like spying on them. You have to be relaxed in this. But you'll be surprised at how much you miss by the fact that you're tending to your smartphone or you're thinking about what you're going to say or about what other people have told you during the day. You're not paying attention. And I want you to be motivated, and I want you to try each time you interact with a person to glean something that you had never realized before about them.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I think I quite liked about the book in the sense that it does provide people with not only the the context, what we're talking about, but it then links it to keys of human nature and provides us with actionable strategies, just like the one you've given us there, whereby spend 30 minutes just observing your spouse, your business partner, whoever it is, and try and glean something new from them that you can then perhaps use going forward and make you a better judge of their character and try and help you better decode what they actually really mean when they say something.
Yeah, another thing I want you to pay attention to, this is the chapter on nonverbal communication, is to pay attention to what is known as micro-expressions. It's something that was sort of invented in the 60s by people who were studying human emotion. And they discovered that for less than a second, like half of a second, people will reveal an emotion on their face that they quickly disguise because they realize it's unpleasant or they're not even aware of what's coming on their face. And sometimes when you go up to a person and you surprise them, coming up to them from an angle, they will reveal a moment of surprise in which they look unhappy to see you, and they'll quickly cover it up with a smile, or they'll reveal an excitement. They're excited to see you, and then they'll try and hide it because they don't want to let you know that they're excited to see you. I want you to pay attention to these little expressions that people are constantly giving out about their emotions. They say that they like your screenplay, they love your business idea, but you notice suddenly that their eyes aren't lighting up, that there's something slightly contrary about that's there's a contradiction between their words and their tone of voice or their look on their face. I want you to pay attention to this language. I call it a second language that humans give out through their eyes, their smile, their body posture. And just, you'll be amazed. You'll suddenly think, my God, it's like a whole world out there I have not even noticed before. It's a very exciting realization.
And I think that could be very, very helpful for a lot of entrepreneurs listening, because one thing they often have to contend with, particularly if they're selling to other organizations, is something I call the counterfeit yes, where you may have you may have a meeting with a prospect and they'll pretend to be really excited about your product, but then you try and follow up after that meeting and it's crickets, and they never get back to you, because if people have an innate desire to be liked, and they'll say what you want to hear in front of you, but as soon as that door is closed, that's the end of that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I live in the land of that in Hollywood, where everyone loves what you have to say. You have the best screenplay, everything's wonderful, and then nothing ever happens because they're lying. But the thing about that is, I have a chapter on basically the ability to influence and persuade people. That before you even try to get them to say yes or detect whether their yes is meaningful or not, you need to do your homework. A lot of people fail at the influence game because they're focused on themselves. They're focused on what they want to express, on their brilliant idea, on how they want to express their own excitement, etc. They're focused on themselves. And I want you to focus deeply on the target. So, that person that you want to say yes to your business, they have their own needs, their own desires, their own world that they live in. They have what I call in my book a self-opinion.
Yes.
They think of themselves as usually smart in their field. They think of themselves as decent, good, good to people. They think of themselves as strong and autonomous, that they're in control of their life. They may have other ideas or values that are specific to them. And you want to validate that person. Your first goal isn't to sell them your idea. It's to make them feel comfortable with you and excited about you and who you are. Because as Warren Buffett said, a business partnership is like a marriage. It's not just business. It's also you're dealing with a person, a personality, a character. And you want to make people feel relaxed in your presence and let down all of their normal guard and defensiveness. And if you're aware of this, if you're thinking more of them than of yourself, if that's your first move on the chessboard, you'll be surprised at how easier the game will be. But yes, you must also pay deep attention to the nonverbals as they say that they love your project, because people always do that and it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I know when you talk about this notion of resisting by confirming people's self-opinion, you say things like, if you disagree with another person and impose your contrary opinion, you're basically implying that you know better. And if you're dealing with someone who has a high self-opinion of themselves, they think they're smart, they think they're in control, you might have a great product that could actually create a lot of value for that organization, but hey, they've got the checkbook, and unless they like you and unless you've confirmed their self-opinion, they might do business with one of your competitors instead. Yes.
I mean, one mistake people always make, and it was the first chapter of my very first book, Never Outshine the Master. The mistake people make is they don't realize that powerful people have very large egos. Now, I mean, it seems obvious. Yeah, of course they do. But with an ego comes very large insecurities, So a person who's the head of a company, it may seem that they shouldn't have any doubts about their intelligence, but they do. They really do. They have doubts. Do people really think I'm smart? Do people really think I'm creative? And if you, in any way, make it seem like you know more than them about this great, brilliant business idea, if you make it seem like they have been stupid by ignoring this great opportunity that you have come across, you, Mr. Brilliant or Miss Brilliant, you're offending them, and you're never going to know it. You're never going to see it on their face. They'll say, yes, I love it. Yeah, But deep down, they're saying to myself, God, this person's implying that I'm kind of not so smart for having missed out on this. Or I really need me, powerful angel investor. I really need this other person to confirm my greatness. You're inadvertently stepping on people's toes all the time. And you must always realize that no matter how powerful they are, people have their insecurities, and you must seek to assuage them before you any attempt at influence.
Yes, and on insecurities, whether it's looks, creative powers, masculinity, and so on, I mean, a lot of people in positions of power suffer from imposter syndrome. And I know you call out the fact that if you are going to allay their insecurities, doing so by focusing on what that person may be uncertain about is where you want to go, rather than things that they know not to be true, because then they may just see right through it.
Yeah, I have a chapter in the book in which I discuss the weird game that went on with Michael Eisner, who was the head of Disney during its heyday in the 70s and 80s. I mean, the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the most famous American CEOs. And he had, the head of one of his studios was Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Yes. And
their kind of interaction is sort of typical for what we're talking about here. And the problem with Eisner, he was the most powerful person in Hollywood by far. Mm. Nobody could compare to him when it came to producing great successes. But that wasn't what he was insecure about. What he was insecure about, he wanted to think that he was actually more creative than the writers, the producers, the actors, that he was a Medici, a modern Medici. Mm. And so when he created Euro Disney, which ended up being a big disaster, it still is, he was hoping the French would sort of validate this opinion of himself as this sort of modern day Lorenzo Medici. And so if you wanted to impress or flatter Michael Eisner, you wouldn't go up to him and say, gosh, you're a shrewd businessman. You've made a ton of money for Disney. Because he knows that. He knew he was good at that, and everybody was telling him that. If you went up to him and said, Michael, you're a creative genius. Your ability to understand high concept film, what you did at Euro Disney, that was the way to melt his heart, because that's who he was. That's where he was insecure.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense in terms of getting that buy-in from people. Robert, I wanted to change tact for a second. And, I've read, the 33 Strategies of War and 48 Laws of Power, and all of your books, like you touched on earlier, they are very, very well researched. But one thing I really love is the fact that, for example, in the 33 Strategies of War, even though you commit a whole chapter to a particular strategy, at the end of the chapter, you start looking at counter strategies, or how a strategy could become a weakness if taken too far, or if against a particular type of adversary. Now, to me, that aligns with the whole philosophy of, say, strong opinions, weakly held. Is that something like actively challenging your own assumptions about the world, about long-held assumptions, something you've actively engaged in? Is this something you kind of discovered over the last, say, 5 or 10 years, or did you always think that way?
No, it's something deeply bred into me from my education. Mm-hmm. People like Socrates and dialogues with Plato, that you mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Socrates sort of drummed into me because my major in college was classics. I studied ancient Greek. That was sort of my specialty. He drummed into you this notion that you are basically ignorant, and that the path to wisdom and intelligence is by first understanding that you don't know anything. Mm-hmm. And so you begin with the assumption that other people think they know what they're talking about, but they don't. And it takes time to arrive at the truth. It's a process, and that you don't know it. So if you begin with that premise, then you're challenging yourself. You start with the idea that you are open to learning what is actually going on. You think it's A, but it could be B, C, or D. And most people will maybe consider B, but they won't go as far as C or D or E ever. Mm. But you, the rational, the philosopher, the deeper thinker, begin with the assumption that you simply don't know what is happening around you. It's a mystery. You're like a child. You are curious and you need to learn. And so if you begin with that assumption, which is something that's been my lifelong trait, mm-hmm. then you don't assume things. You don't assume that your strategy is brilliant. I could start a business that would make me $10 billion tomorrow just by taking CEOs around the country and going to them and saying, are you thinking truly of what could go wrong with the step that you're about to take right now? Mm-hmm. You are so certain about your strategy. You're headed down a straight line. You feel very confident. It's good to feel confident. It's good to execute something well. But what are the unintended consequences? What is it that you haven't considered? What are the possible dangers that are lurking around the corner that you are not seeing right now? And they'll probably go, wow, well, I thought of this, and I go, no, that's not enough. You're not considering enough. You're fooling yourself. You want to believe so strongly that you have the right strategy that you're fooling yourself, that you're considering other possibilities. You need to widen your scope of investigation. And yes, if you're looking at a strategy A that's headed down this path, maybe look at it from the reverse angle. Maybe doing the opposite might be the best strategy. Maybe be doing something totally different. Sun Tzu, the great Chinese strategist and a major influence on my work, calls this the unorthodox. Great generals succeed by harnessing the unorthodox. They come at you from an angle that no one ever thought of. That's what's going to lead to a great business success. You have come at it from an angle that nobody else thought of. But that takes a lot of mental training. It's not easy.
And coming at it from an angle that no one has thought of. For so long, if you look at a lot of military tacticians, it was all about well thought out strategies. But then you had someone like Napoleon who came along and really used chaos in many cases to disorient their opponents. And I know John Boyd, similarly, many, many years later, as one of the most popular US Air Force pilots, was a big proponent of tightening the feedback loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. The faster you could do that, you could get inside your opponent's feedback loop, and for them, they wouldn't be able to orient themselves fast enough to respond. So always looking for that counter strategy or that unorthodox that people don't expect you to go into battle with can throw off their plans.
Yes, in this world today, you need to find any advantage that you possibly can. And what I loved about Napoleon, who was the hero of my third book, the 33 Strategies of War, is that I call it controlled chaos. It's not simply chaos for the sake of chaos. He was creating chaos for his opponent. But on his side, it was very controlled, very well thought out. And he created what is known as maneuver warfare. And I have a chapter on this in that book, and I think it's very applicable to business. And basically the idea is the army that succeeds puts itself in a position where it can take path A, B, or C depending on what the enemy does. So it has options. It can see what is going to happen in the market or wherever. It's not rigidly strapped into a linear straight path line towards a goal. It's like, I can adapt. I'm in a position of power. Sun Tzu calls this shi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the Chinese right, but it's a position of immense power, like a boulder on top
of a hill,
of a mountain that's ready to fall down. You're in that perfect position, and you can now go in one of three directions or four directions, depending on what the enemy shows. That is true strategic thinking. A lot of people fool themselves into thinking they're being strategists when they're merely being tacticians. Strategy is an art. It's a very creative process. And, it's sort of the subject of all of my books.
Yes. And on not jumping to conclusions and on looking at alternative A, B, C, and D, I was keen to understand, when you're putting your books together, Robert, I imagine you sift through a wealth of information to synthesize down to what gets onto a page. Now, how do you avoid, say, falling into the narrative fallacy and trying to weave an explanation into a series of facts that may not be accurate? I imagine that's somewhat challenging given the breadth and depth of your work.
Well, it's a possibility that continually haunts me, and probably I have been guilty of. I won't deny. But I put an incredible amount of thinking into what I write. That's probably why my health has deteriorated recently, and this last book was such a drain on me. So when I took Napoleon, for instance, I read over 3,000 pages of biographies on him, and my goal was, I don't just want to, discuss Napoleon and kind of use him for lessons. I want to know what is the essence of what made him brilliant. I am like a scientist. I am going to dig, and I'm going to come up with what I think is truly at the core of his strategic brilliance. He had 10 years of the most successful military run in history, and then 10 bad years of terrible decline. Why? I had the same question posed to me in Mastery about Leonardo da Vinci. Why is he the person, sort of the icon of this book, of someone who truly mastered the creative possibilities of the human brain? Why? What made him so different? In my new book, I have other such icons, and I want to discuss and figure out, why Pericles, who opens up the laws of human nature, why is he my icon for rationality? I just don't stop at the surface. I just don't try to begin with a thesis that I'm going to fit them into. So I look and then I discover, and the material, their life, tells me what the lesson is, not my preconceived idea. So coming to Napoleon with a totally open mind, I was surprised to come to the conclusion that the source of his brilliance was that he was incredibly organized. He had a brain like a modern computer. He could take vast amounts of information and organize it in his brain on a far greater level than anybody else. That was what made him a genius. So it's possible I could be wrong, but I really don't think so. I really think I hit upon something there.
Yeah.
And, I do that with all of the historical characters that I write about.
And I do think it's a credit to your work. It's clear that, like you said, with Napoleon, you did digest 3,000 pages of notes before you actually started to put the book together. And, it's unfortunately had a detrimental effect on your health, but the quality of the work does come through. And one thing you touched on there was Pericles, the ancient Greek politician. And he knew that emotions ultimately turn us inward and away from intelligence. And in his line of work, politics and war, one needed to be rational, but that domain was basically overpowered with emotion. And I guess in today's political climate, particularly in the US, where there is this massive sort of expanding divide between left and right, to me it seems like you have people, say, on the far left, and let's say for ease of labels, we'll call them social justice warriors, who may be looking for a fast track to, say, moral righteousness, without actually doing the work to be truly moral. And this also aligns with something you talk about in your book, which is the false purpose, where it seems like there's a hell of a lot of emotion on the far left and also on the far right, but not enough rationality, not enough exploring alternative B, C, and D, and ultimately just trying to obtain that sense of moral righteousness or importance or sense of self-worth from just protesting.
Yeah, in that chapter, I call it the conviction bias. And what I mean by that is if somebody says something with enough conviction and anger and outrage, we assume that there must be something true or right about it. And such a person will find all kinds of followers, and they'll think that the more outrage and anger I express, the more true I am being, the more that proves that I'm sincere and that I really have come upon something. Whereas in fact, the more certain people are, the louder they yell, the more suspicious you must become of them. They're hiding something. They're hiding their insecurities. Nobody should be that certain of the truth. We humans should be much more humble. And what I try and show in that chapter on rationality is I wanted you to realize that human beings are by nature irrational, that you, the listener out there, begin from the position that you are essentially irrational. Your emotions govern you. You make 95% of your decisions on what they call the affective heuristic. People in marketing know this very, very well. People's choices in the marketplace and business are largely governed by their emotions, by their desires, by what they want to see. They feel something, and then their brain kicks in to try to justify what they are feeling. To be truly rational, you have to take a step back, and you have to first realize that you are most often allowing yourself to be governed by emotions, that what other people are thinking affects what you were thinking, that you naturally tend to go with the crowd. And what I chose Pericles for was, He decided that the human animal has to worship, has to love something, that's one emotion that's the most primary of all, a sense of purpose, something that we value. The problem is most people value being right, having a lot of attention, having power, having money. And he decided that his ultimate value would be rationality, trying to arrive at the truth, at something higher, and getting beyond all the tribalism in politics and arriving at what would be the best for the greatest number of people in ancient Athens. He would worship rationality in the form of Athena. It was the goddess that he prayed to. Each decision of his had to go through a process where he subtracted all of the emotional responses that he knew were inside him. He subtracted his desires. He subtracted the need for ego gratification, for attention. What is the truth? What is it that will really, really work in this situation? So you can't begin to start making yourself into a better strategist, into a better thinker, until you realize the degree to which emotions are shaping what you think and warping them. And so, this is the process that I discussed through the story of Pericles.
Yes, and you talk about people increasing their reaction times whenever some sort of external stimuli presents itself and it's easy to respond with emotion. Just take more time and train yourself to take the time to respond with reason rather than to react with impulse and with emotion. And I mean, personal story there. I mean, just last week I had an article published on Harvard Business Review and it got a number of comments. And then most of the comments were overwhelmingly positive, but then some were questioning the article. And when those comments initially came through, part of me wanted to just jump in there and respond and go on a tirade, but I just stopped and I said, well, let me get back to this tomorrow. And the next day came around, and not only did I change my view, I could see some merit in what they were saying, and there's different ways to look at the information presented, but at the same time, I had no desire to respond, because if you're constantly in that state of emotional reactivity, like you just don't present so much deliberate intent to your work and to how you present yourself every day.
Yeah, and social media makes it very difficult. A major theme in my new book is that social media tends to bring out some of the worst qualities in human nature, which is sort of seems contradictory. You'd think that the high point of technology, this brilliant invention, would be a sort of a tool for progress. But in many ways, it's a tool that we can use to sort of shield ourselves from being punished and kind of indulge in our darkest impulses, in our rage, in our anger, in our righteousness, in the envy that we feel. So it can kind of become a cesspool for a lot of these negative emotions. I'm not saying that it's all like that, of course not. But so you're constantly finding your emotions being pulled on the internet because you're seeing, all the great things that other people have. Their great jobs, their wonderful vacations, so it's stirring your envy continuously. You're reading posts by snarky people that are doing passive-aggressive comments about your article that you worked so hard on and on and on. And it's really hard to control yourself. But that is one exercise I advocate. It's like an athlete. You're training your muscles as a kind of resistance. Naturally, your anger, and you write a counter post or letter or whatever, ripping them to shreds. And I want you to resist that, just like when you're exercising, you're using weights as resistance training. Resist your emotions, push back at them, and step back. And the next day or 2 days later, you'll say, well, yeah, I do need to comment on that person's post, but I'm in a better position to do it. Or more likely, it's not worth getting into an ugly fight with someone who's probably more passive aggressive than I am.
Yeah, and technology can hijack our attention, particularly the way most social media platforms and devices are engineered today, whereby we have these notifications, which are resonant of Pavlov's bell, ding, and off I go onto Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or wherever else, and just being in this state of constant reactivity. And it's actually quite detrimental to people's ability to get into flow and to do creative work, which is the nature of work today. I mean, most work has evolved from algorithmic work to heuristic work. But if people are constantly at the mercy of notifications, whether it's email, social media, and so on, I mean, their ability to do great work is just compromised big time.
Yeah, I think the great irony is here is that the person that inadvertently might be the most guilty of that would be Steve Jobs with the invention of the smartphone. But when it came to his own work, he was incredibly focused. So when he wanted to come up with some new design or new invention, he would go into his office, shut the door, nobody could bother him, and for 12 hours he would sit at his desk thinking and grinding mentally through the problem without any disruptions at all. And his motto was focus, focus, focus. And in Mastery, I discuss that is the motto for anybody who's successful in life, from Da Vinci to Thomas Edison to Steve Jobs, because the human brain is designed for utter persistence. I maintain in the laws of human nature that if you persist at a problem, at something that you want to solve, and you spend days, weeks, months, years trying to solve it, you will, because of the way the brain functions. Things will come to you. You will have thought of so many different possibilities that one morning you wake up in the shower and suddenly the great idea will come to you, the solution. It was how Einstein worked. So you must realize that social media is a detriment. It is hurting your ability to focus. And you must get angry at yourself for allowing yourself to be seduced constantly by it, and develop that resistance training where you push back and you create time away from it. You know, every day, a half hour less than the day before. Resistance training. You know, don't give into the temptation, because if you can't focus, particularly in the world today, you're doomed. It's like the most critical skill when it comes to any kind of creative venture.
Well, there's a reason why Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, said that Facebook should be regulated like cigarettes.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at Mark Zuckerberg and how he talks about it, he went into the science very deeply in marketing of how to capture people's attention and hold it, and how to prey upon people's basic instincts to keep them addicted to social media. So he didn't start, despite what he might say, he didn't start from this altruistic premise of connecting the world, you know, and all that crap. He started from the premise of, how do I capture billions of people and keep them addicted? And if you understand that that's what motivated him, maybe you'll feel motivated yourself to step back from Facebook a little bit.
Definitely, definitely. So before we wrap up, I mean, one thing you've touched on, Robert, is the fact that you should use persuasion only as a last resort, which I think is quite encouraging, because you do talk about the fact that human beings generally aren't the type of people who want to deceive and manipulate, that despite what others have taught you, the number of people who love pushy persuaders, you can count on one finger, or on one's fingers rather. So despite everything that is in the laws of human nature, I guess it's something that we should turn to, like you said, only as a last resort.
Meaning what?
Persuasion.
Well, no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand you there, because I do think that everything that you do. Maybe I have to differentiate persuasion from influence.
Sure.
Because I think we constantly want the ability to influence the people around us to some degree. If we have our children or spouse and they have behavior that we don't like, the idea that we can't influence them at all is deeply, deeply distressing. So you want the ability to move people to some degree in the direction that you desire. But you're right in the sense that if you're so direct and pushy and aggressive, that to me doesn't really persuasion. That's kind of what I call anti-seduction.
Right.
You're turning people off. You're pushing up their defenses instead of lowering them. So I want you to look at people differently. That's what my book is designed to do. I'm wanting to try to make you look at yourself and look at other people indifferently. They are an individual. They come to life with their own experience, their own cultural background. There may be a different gender, a different race, a different religion, a different cultural, social milieu. and they have their own experience that's not yours. And to the degree that you feel empathy, that you understand them, that you can get inside their mindset and how they think and what their values are, then you have the ability to say something or to do something that will please them, that will make them an ally, that will make them want to go in your direction. I have a chapter in the book on laws of human nature called Make Them Want to Follow You. That's the number one key to being a successful leader. You don't want to push people. You don't want to cajole them. You don't want to yell at them. You want them to follow you willingly. They love to follow your lead. They want to follow the example that you set. So the example that you set by your working hard, by being conscientious, by treating your employees well, by punishing those people who are not doing well, by setting the right tone as the leader, then people want to follow you and they'll do what you say without all of the need to cajole, yell, or punish. That is the ultimate position to be in. That's the position of authority. So you're right, I guess I am advocating that. But I want you to get over the notion that you're not interested in influence. You're constantly interested in it. And whether you, in your day-to-day life, you are influencing people, but you're probably negatively influencing them. You're turning them off by not being aware of how they're perceiving what you're saying and doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just on that last note on turning people away by not perceiving what you're saying or doing, reminds me of a book by a Toltec master called Don Miguel Ruiz called The Four Agreements, in which he says one of the agreements is basically be impeccable with your word, because everything you say can be interpreted in a way that reflects on you and can be and does influence people, particularly if you're an entrepreneur and you've got a team. If you want to be followed, be careful with the words that you use.
Most definitely. The other similar advice I would give, which is also from that one chapter I mentioned, is get over the sense of entitlement that normally comes to you when you have power or a leadership position. You do not deserve naturally the respect of people. You just because you're the head doesn't mean that people have to obey and follow you and admire you. You have to earn that every single day by what you do and what you say. So place yourself in the position of feeling like you need to impress people. You need to gain their respect, no matter how important you think you are. Because the moment you feel you're entitled to people doing what you say and following you, you are doomed. Because people hate leaders and rulers who emanate this sense of entitlement. Nobody finds that an attractive quality. We like the quality of that I'm here for you. I want to serve you. I want to be the best boss. I want all of us to work together. What can I do to become a better leader? So get rid of that sense that you're privileged and that people automatically need to obey you no matter what you say or do.
Yeah. Well, if you look through the annals of history and you see a leader like, say, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, and compare how people look back on him with someone like his son, Commodus, it speaks volumes about being a leader that people actually want to follow. Right.
And I have the icon for this is Queen Elizabeth I. That's who I use, because normally a king or a queen in that position is the ultimate sense of entitlement. But the brilliance of Queen Elizabeth I, one of the most underrated leaders in history ever, was that as a woman, she knew that in fact, even if she's the Queen of England, nobody respects her. They think that only a man can rule the country, that she's too weak, she's too emotional. So she turned around the dynamic, and her continual thought is, how can I earn the respect of the English people? There had never been a king or a queen that thought first and foremost of the English people as opposed to the court or the aristocracy or the immediate circle of advisors. She created a power base that had never really existed before, and it became her bulwark in power. But she was constantly telling herself, any moment, people are going to turn against me if I'm not careful and if I'm not trying to earn their respect. So, that your example of Marcus Aurelius is very well put, because people who inherit money or position or power are often the worst kinds of leaders.
Yes, definitely, because they haven't going back to what we discussed at the start of the conversation, it's oftentimes the grit that makes the pearl. And unless you've actually earned the right to be the leader, you may not demonstrate the qualities of a leader if it was just inherited.
Yeah. I'm sure we have to look at the Murdochs to see what's going on there. I don't know what the sons are like. Maybe they've imbibed this lesson, or maybe not.
Maybe to a certain degree. I know they've been dating all sorts of pop stars and marrying them and divorcing them shortly thereafter, but that's outside of the scope of what I could really talk about. But look, lucky last, Robert. I mean, you've been very gracious with your time, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. But just wanted to explore any sort of rituals or routines that you've kind of held close to your heart to keep you performing at a high level. I know you're a student of Zen Buddhism. Has that been a lifelong endeavor?
Well, I can say that from early on, I was very much fascinated by it and read a lot of books on it, but only about starting 8 years ago, I created a ritual of every morning, a morning meditation of 35 minutes. Mm-hmm. I've taken some courses on it. I've gone to some Zen temples, etc. But essentially, it is extremely helpful to me because I have to deal with a lot of stress. My head is filled with ideas that I carry around with me all day. Mm. And I take the morning as soon as I wake up and I clear my head of all of my thoughts and I try and empty everything out. And I look deeply at myself and I feel like passing thoughts and passing emotions. And I go, why am I thinking that? Why am I feeling that? Is that my ego speaking? Is that coming from a deep place? Is that me speaking or someone else? Why am I feeling this little wave of anger? Is that really important in my life? And I try and look at myself with some distance. At the same time, I try and go, this is a new day and this is a new morning. I'm trying to fill myself with that early morning energy and kind of wiping the slate clean, but also with a great deal of self-introspection. Because the ability to look at yourself and to introspect and to think about why you feel a certain way or why you act a certain way is a critical life skill, and it doesn't come naturally or easy to us. The moment you enter the arena of business or politics or wherever, people are yelling at you, you find your thoughts tug this and that direction. It's hard to detach. You have to learn how to do that. I've only been at this for 8 years, and so I still consider myself a beginner. Another 10 years or so, maybe I will have advanced to a new stage. But man, it has really, 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 I can't emphasize enough that just doing that one ritual has probably done more for me than anything else I've ever done for myself in my life.
Yeah. Well, I've only been at meditation for about 3 years, so I am a complete newbie still. When I compare myself to your definition of 8 years being a beginner, but it has had a transformational effect on my life. And like you said, whatever you can do to make yourself more emotionally aware, and not at the mercy of some of those emotions we talked about earlier when we talked about Pericles, can only make you make better decisions and perform better at life.
I agree 100%, definitely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Robert. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. People can find out more about you over at the blog of Robert Greene, which is powerseductionandwar.com. They can find you on Twitter at Robert Greene. And of course, they can find your many New York Times bestseller books over at Amazon and wherever good books are sold. Any parting words of wisdom for the audience, Robert?
No, just thank you so much for having me, Steve. And, I love Australia. Someday I can't wait to get back there. One of my favorite countries I've ever visited. So just realize that you're very blessed to live on that beautiful island.
Thank you so much. And we won't share with the audience which city is your favorite.
No, please no. I think Sydney is the most beautiful city I've seen in the world. And Melbourne is one of the most fascinating places I've ever been to. I'll put it that way.
Very diplomatically put. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome, Steve. Thank you.
Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Glibeski and on Instagram at TheSteveGlibeski. Until next time,
Hasta la vista, baby.